I still remember the first time I laid eyes on that property. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and the real estate agent had called me the night before, practically buzzing with excitement. "I think I found it," she said. "The place you've been looking for." After 32 years of working in the construction business, I was finally ready to retire. My wife had passed away 3 years earlier, and my kids were grown with families of their own. I wanted something peaceful, somewhere I could wake up without an alarm clock, somewhere I could breathe. Most importantly, I wanted to fish. That had always been my escape, my meditation, my way of finding calm in a chaotic world. The property was about 40 minutes outside the city, in a quiet community called Pine Valley Estates. When I pulled into the driveway, I knew immediately. The house itself was nothing fancy, just a simple ranch-style home with cream-colored siding and a wraparound porch, but it sat on 3 acres of pure tranquility, with old oak trees scattered across the lawn and wildflowers growing along the fence line. And then I saw the lake. It wasn't massive, maybe half an acre, but it was mine, completely entirely on my property. The water was clear and calm that morning, reflecting the sky like a mirror. I could see the ripples where fish were feeding near the surface. The real estate agent smiled at me. "The previous owner stocked it with bass and bluegill about 5 years ago," she said. "He used to fish here every single day." I made an offer that afternoon. The paperwork took about 6 weeks to finalize. During that time, I read through every single document related to the property: the deed, the survey maps, the soil reports, and yes, all the homeowner association paperwork. I'd heard enough horror stories about HOAs from friends and coworkers over the years. I wasn't about to walk into a situation where I couldn't paint my mailbox the color I wanted, or had to ask permission to plant a tree. The Pine Valley HOA seemed reasonable enough. There were rules about keeping your lawn mowed, restrictions on certain exterior paint colors, and guidelines about not leaving trash cans visible from the street. Standard stuff. The monthly fee was only $75, which mostly went toward maintaining the community entrance and the small park near the main road. Nothing in any of the documents mentioned lakes, ponds, or fishing. Nothing restricted what I could do on my own property as long as it didn't disturb the neighbors. I closed on the house in late April. Moving day was exhausting, but I didn't care. That first evening, after the movers had left and my furniture was scattered in boxes throughout the house, I grabbed my fishing rod from the truck. I didn't even bother setting up my bedroom. I walked down to the lake as the sun was starting to set, cast my line into the water, and felt something release in my chest that had been tight for years. I caught a decent bass on my third cast. Threw him back, of course. Catch and release had always been my style unless I was planning to cook dinner. I stood there until it was almost dark, listening to the crickets start their evening song and watching the fireflies begin to blink along the shore. This was home. The next few weeks were busy with unpacking and getting settled. I met some of the neighbors during that time. The couple next door, the Pattersons, were in their 60s and had lived in Pine Valley for almost 15 years. They were friendly enough. Brought over a casserole the second day I was there. The husband, Bill, noticed my fishing equipment and mentioned he used to fish as a kid but hadn't picked up a rod in decades. "You're lucky to have that lake," he said, looking out over the water from my back porch. "Previous owner, Mr. Chen, he loved that thing. Took great care of it. We used to see him out there every morning, rain or shine." Across the street lived a younger family with 2 kids who were always riding bikes up and down the cul-de-sac. They waved whenever they saw me. Down the road was a retired teacher who walked her dog past my house twice a day. Everyone seemed nice, normal. The kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business but would help you if you needed it. I fell into a routine quickly. I'd wake up around sunrise, make a pot of coffee, and head down to the lake with my tackle box. I'd fish for an hour or 2, usually catching something, sometimes not. It didn't really matter. It was about being out there, feeling the cool morning air, watching the mist rise off the water as the sun came up. Sometimes I'd see a heron standing at the far edge of the lake, hunting for his own breakfast. We'd share the space in comfortable silence. After fishing, I'd come back to the house, make some breakfast, and spend the rest of the day however I wanted. Some days I'd work on home improvement projects. Other days I'd read on the porch or drive into town to run errands. I started a small garden near the side of the house. I called my kids every few days, visited my grandkids on weekends when I could. Life was simple. Life was good. About 2 months after I'd moved in, there was an HOA election. I'd gotten a notice in my mailbox about it but didn't pay much attention. I figured whoever was running the board was doing a fine enough job. The neighborhood looked neat. The common areas were maintained. Nobody was bothering anybody. I tossed the notice on my kitchen counter and forgot about it. I didn't attend the meeting. Looking back, maybe I should have. But I was new to the neighborhood, and honestly, HOA politics seemed like the kind of drama I'd moved out here to avoid. I'd spent 3 decades dealing with difficult clients, impossible deadlines, and office drama. I just wanted peace. The morning after the election, Bill Patterson mentioned in passing that there was a new HOA president, a woman named Carol who lived in one of the bigger houses near the community entrance. She ran unopposed, Bill said, trimming the hedge between our properties. Gave this whole speech about wanting to elevate community standards and protect property values. Seems pretty intense if you ask me. I nodded but didn't think much of it. People who volunteered for HOA boards usually fell into 2 categories: folks who genuinely wanted to help the neighborhood, or folks who liked having a little bit of power. Either way, as long as they left me alone to fish in my own lake, I didn't care. That was my mistake. For the next few weeks, everything continued as normal. I fished in the mornings, worked on my house, lived my quiet life. I waved to Carol once when I saw her driving past my property slowly, her head turned toward my lake. She didn't wave back. I figured maybe she didn't see me. Then came that Saturday in July. I was standing at the edge of the lake about 7 in the morning, working on reeling in what felt like a pretty good-sized bass. The line was tight, the rod was bent, and I was focused on the fight. That's when I heard footsteps in the grass behind me. Quick, purposeful footsteps. I turned and saw a woman I didn't recognize marching across my lawn with her phone held up in front of her face. She was taking pictures of me, of my lake, of my fishing rod. "Good morning," I called out, confused but trying to be polite. She barely glanced at me. Just kept snapping photos, moving around to get different angles. She was probably in her late 50s, wearing pressed khaki pants and a polo shirt, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Excuse me," I said, louder this time. "Can I help you with something?" That's when she finally looked directly at me, lowering her phone just slightly. "You're in violation of community standards," she said. Her voice was sharp, authoritative.
"This water feature is creating liability issues for the entire neighborhood." I just stood there, my fishing rod still in my hands, the base I'd been fighting now long gone.
I had no idea what she was talking about. Water feature? Liability issues? This was my lake, on my property. What did any of that have to do with the community? I was about to find out just how complicated my peaceful retirement was about to become. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what this woman had just said to me. Water feature? I looked at my lake, the same lake I'd been fishing in every morning for 2 months. The same lake that was completely, 100% on my property according to every legal document I'd signed. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I think there's been some confusion. This is my private lake. It's entirely on my property." She didn't even blink, just kept tapping on her phone, presumably making notes or taking more pictures. "I'm Carol Pritchard, the HOA president," she announced, like that title gave her some kind of authority over my land. "And I'm informing you that recreational use of water features within the community boundaries creates insurance liability for all residents." I felt my jaw tighten. I dealt with difficult people my entire career, but something about having someone stand on my own property and tell me what I couldn't do there hit differently. "With all due respect, this isn't a community water feature. It's my lake, I own it. It's on my deed." Carol finally lowered her phone and looked at me like I was a child who didn't understand basic rules. "Any body of standing water over a certain size falls under community regulations. I'll be bringing this matter to the board, and you'll be receiving formal notification." Before I could respond, she turned and walked back across my lawn toward the street where her car was parked. I watched her go, completely stunned. In 32 years of working construction, dealing with building codes, permits, and regulations, I'd never had someone just walk onto my property and tell me I couldn't use it. I stood there for another 10 minutes, but my peaceful morning was ruined. I couldn't focus on fishing anymore. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from anger. I packed up my gear and walked back to the house. The first thing I did was pull out all my closing documents. The property survey clearly showed the lake boundaries. Every inch of that water was within my property lines. The deed listed the lake as part of the parcel. I read through the HOA covenants again, this time even more carefully. There was absolutely nothing about lakes, ponds, or any restrictions on how I could use my own land as long as I wasn't creating a nuisance for neighbors. I called Bill Patterson, figuring he'd lived here long enough to know if there was something I'd missed. He answered on the second ring. "Bill, it's your neighbor. Question for you. Did Mr. Chen, the previous owner, ever have any issues with the HOA about the lake?" There was a pause. "Issues? No, not that I know of. Why do you ask?" I told him about Carol's visit that morning. Bill let out a long sigh. "Yeah, that sounds like her. She's been on a tear since she got elected. Last week, she sent a violation notice to the Rodriguezes because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Black, mind you, just not the exact black she approved of. Can she actually do anything about my fishing?" I asked. "I honestly don't know," Bill said, "but I'd document everything if I were you. Carol seems like the type who doesn't let things go." He was right about that. 3 days later, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from the Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association, signed by Carol Pritchard as president. My hands were actually shaking as I opened it. The letter was 2 pages long, filled with formal legal language that basically said I was in violation of Section 7.3 of the Community Covenants, which apparently covered maintenance of community aesthetics and safety standards. According to Carol's interpretation, my recreational use of a water feature posed potential safety hazards, could attract unwanted wildlife, might increase mosquito populations, and could negatively impact property values. The letter demanded that I immediately cease all fishing activities. If I didn't comply, I would be fined $100 per day every single day until I stopped. $100 a day for fishing in my own lake. I read the letter 3 times, each time getting angrier. Then I did what any reasonable person would do. I called a lawyer. The attorney's name was David Chen, no relation to the previous owner. He specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His secretary fit me in for a consultation that same afternoon. David's office was in a small building downtown. Nothing fancy, but his walls were covered with framed case files and legal certificates. He was maybe 40 years old, wearing casual business clothes, and he had this calm, confident way about him that immediately put me at ease. I showed him the letter, my property documents, and the HOA covenants. He read through everything carefully, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Okay," he said finally, looking up at me. "The good news is they don't have a leg to stand on. This lake is completely on your property. The covenant section they're citing has nothing to do with private property use. It's about maintaining common areas and not creating eyesores visible from the street. So I can just ignore this?" David shook his head. "I wouldn't recommend that. HOAs can place liens on your property if you don't pay fines, even if those fines are bogus. What we need to do is respond formally, establish the legal facts, and shut this down before it goes further." He drafted a response letter that afternoon. It was professional but firm, citing property law, referencing my deed and survey, and pointing out that the HOA had no legal authority to regulate what I did on my own land. He attached copies of all my property documents and a statement that any further harassment would be considered as such. We sent it certified mail. I felt good about it. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The HOA board met the following Tuesday. I didn't attend because, frankly, I didn't think I needed to. My lawyer had made everything crystal clear. But Bill Patterson went, and he called me that night. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Carol brought up your situation, and the board voted to amend the community regulations. They're adding a clause about water bodies." "They can't do that," I said. "Can they?" They just did. Carol argued that any standing water over a quarter acre poses drainage and mosquito concerns for the whole community. She got the other board members to agree. Now they're saying your lake falls under this new rule. I felt like I was in some kind of absurd nightmare. "Bill, they can't just make up rules to target one person." I know. I voted against it for what it's worth. But Carol's got most of the board convinced she's protecting everyone's property values. The next morning, I received another letter. This one informed me that the HOA regulations had been updated, and I was now officially in violation. The daily fine would begin in 7 days if I didn't comply. I went fishing anyway. It was my property, my lake, my right. But for the first time since moving there, I didn't enjoy it. I kept looking over my shoulder, waiting for Carol to appear with her phone again. A week later, she did something I never expected. I was out on the lake on a Thursday morning around 8 o'clock. The weather was beautiful and I was finally starting to relax again despite everything. Then I heard car doors slamming. 2 of them. I turned around and saw a sheriff's patrol car parked in my driveway. 2 deputies were walking across my lawn toward the lake. My heart started pounding. What on earth had I done that warranted police showing up at my house? "Morning, sir," the first deputy called out. He was young, maybe late 20s, and he looked uncomfortable. "We got a call about someone operating an unpermitted recreational facility on this property." I just stared at him. "Oh, what?" The second deputy, an older woman, was looking around at my property, then at me standing there with my fishing rod. I could see the moment she realized what was actually happening. "Sir, is this your property?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. I live right there." I pointed at my house. "This is my lake." "I'm just fishing." The older deputy pulled out her radio and stepped away, speaking quietly into it. The younger deputy shifted his weight awkwardly. "So, someone from your homeowners association called it in. Said there was illegal recreational activity happening?" "I'm fishing," I repeated, hearing my own voice get louder. "In my own lake, on my own property. There's nothing illegal about it." The female deputy came back. "Sir, this appears to be a civil matter between you and your HOA. There's no criminal activity here. We're going to clear the call." They apologized for the inconvenience and left. But I stood there on the shore of my lake, my fishing rod still in my hands, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Humiliation. Carol had called the police on me. For fishing in my own lake, in front of my neighbors in my own yard, like I was some kind of criminal. That's when I realized this wasn't just about HOA rules or property rights anymore. This was personal, and it was only going to get worse. After the police left that morning, I didn't go back inside right away. I just sat on my back porch staring at the lake, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. Someone had actually called law enforcement on me for fishing on my own property. It felt surreal, like something that would happen in a bad movie, not in real life. My phone rang around noon. It was my daughter, Kelly. "Dad, are you okay?" Mrs. Patterson just called Mom's old cell phone and left a message. She said police were at your house this morning. Word travels fast in small neighborhoods. I explained the whole situation to her, trying to downplay it so she wouldn't worry. But Kelly wasn't having it. "Dad, this is harassment. You need to do more than just send letters. This woman is clearly out of control." She was right. I called David, my attorney, and told him about the police showing up. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "She called the sheriff's department? On what grounds?" "Something about an unpermitted recreational facility." The deputies figured out pretty quick it was just HOA drama and left. I heard David typing on his computer. "Okay, this changes things. We're not just dealing with an overzealous HOA president anymore. This is potential abuse of process, maybe even harassment. We need to go on offense here, not just defense." "What does that mean?" "It means we dig deeper. In my experience, when someone acts this irrationally over something like this, there's usually more to the story. Give me a few days to do some research." While David was investigating, the harassment continued. Every single day, I found a new violation notice in my mailbox. One day it was for unsightly fishing equipment visible from the street, even though my tackle box was on my back porch, barely visible. Another day it was for improper water feature maintenance because there were some leaves floating on the lake. Natural leaves. From the trees on my property. That fall in autumn. Like they do. Each notice threatened the same $100 per day fine. I was keeping every single one, documenting everything, but it was exhausting. I'd moved out here for peace, and instead I was living in constant stress. The worst part was the neighborhood. Some people were supportive. Bill Patterson kept checking on me, and a few other neighbors stopped by to say they thought the whole thing was ridiculous. But others started avoiding eye contact when I waved. I heard through Bill that Carol had started an email chain among the homeowners, painting me as someone who refused to follow community rules and was putting everyone's property values at risk. She was turning my neighbors against me, and there wasn't much I could do about it. I stopped fishing for about a week. Not because I thought Carol was right, but because I was tired of the fight. Every time I walked down to the lake, I felt eyes on me. I felt like I was doing something wrong even though I knew I wasn't. Then my son Jason drove down from the city for a surprise visit. He found me sitting on the porch just staring at nothing. "Dad, this isn't you," he said. "You're letting them win. I'm not letting anyone win." "I'm just tired, Jace," he sat down next to me. "Remember when I was 12 and that kid Trevor kept bullying me at school? You told me that bullies only have power if you give it to them. You told me to stand up for myself." I looked at my son, now 34 years old with kids of his own, and felt something shift inside me. He was right. I'd spent my whole life being a problem solver, facing difficult situations head on. I wasn't going to let some power-hungry HOA president drive me out of my own home. The next morning, I went fishing again, and it felt good. David called me 3 days later.
"Can you come to my office?"
"I found some things you need to see." I drove into town that afternoon, curious and a little nervous. David's desk was covered with papers, printouts, and highlighted documents. "Okay," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "So I did some digging into your HOA, Carol Pritchard, and the property situation in general. And things got interesting fast." He slid a document across the desk. It was a copy of the original HOA, covenants from when Pine Valley Estates was first developed. First thing you need to understand is that the HOA has absolutely zero legal authority to regulate anything that's entirely within your property boundaries. The amendment they passed? It's not legally valid. They can't retroactively restrict your property rights without a vote from all homeowners, not just the board. And even then, there are legal limits. So all these violation notices are meaningless. Essentially, yes. But that's not the interesting part. David pulled out another set of papers. "I started looking into why Carol is so fixated on your property specifically. You're not the only person in Pine Valley with a pond or water feature. There are at least 4 other properties with similar setups, but you're the only one getting violation notices." He let that sink in for a moment. So I did some research on Carol herself, public records, property transactions, business filings, and I found something very interesting. He showed me a document. Carol's daughter is married to a man named Richard Vance. He's a property developer. And about 6 months ago, his company made inquiries with the county about potential subdivision developments in your area. My stomach dropped. "What kind of inquiries?" "The kind where they're looking for properties to buy, tear down, and redevelop. Your 3 acres with the lake? That's prime real estate. You could easily fit 3, maybe 4 luxury homes on that land if you filled in the lake and subdivided." I sat back in my chair, processing this. "You think Carol is harassing me to try to get me to sell?" "I think Carol's son-in-law wants your property, and she's using her position as HOA president to make your life miserable enough that you'll want to leave." I pulled some property records. There were preliminary inquiries made about your property before you even bought it. Someone wanted to know if it was for sale. David pulled out more documents, but it gets better, or worse depending on how you look at it. I started asking around about Carol's tenure as HOA president. Turns out you're not her first target. He showed me a list of names and incidents. An elderly couple who'd been cited repeatedly for their garden gnomes until they finally removed them. A single mother who'd gotten violation notices about her children's toys in the yard until she moved. A retired veteran who'd been fined for parking his truck in his own driveway because it was commercial looking, even though it was just a regular pickup. "There's a pattern here," David said. "Carol uses her position to bully people she doesn't like or who won't do what she wants. And she's been getting away with it because most people don't fight back. They just comply or move." I felt anger building in my chest, but also something else. Clarity. This wasn't about fishing or lake regulations or community standards. This was about power and money and someone who'd been abusing their position for too long. "What can we do about it?" I asked. David smiled. "Quite a lot, actually. First, I'm going to draft a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA, outlining all the legal issues with their actions. Second, I'm going to file a harassment complaint with the county. Third, and this is important, we're going to reach out to those other homeowners Carol has targeted. Why? Because there's strength in numbers. If multiple people come forward with similar stories, it's not just one person fighting the HOA. It's a pattern of abuse, and that's much harder for them to dismiss. I left David's office feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope and determination. That evening, I called the elderly couple David had mentioned, the Johnsons. They lived about 6 blocks from me. I introduced myself and explained the situation carefully. There was a long pause after I finished talking. Then Mrs. Johnson said quietly, "We took our garden gnomes down because she threatened to put a lien on our house. We'd had those gnomes for 15 years. They were gifts from our grandchildren. I'm sorry that happened to you," I said, "but I'm not taking my situation lying down and I could use your help. What do you need? Your story, your documentation, anything you have that shows what Carol did to you?" Another pause. "Then we'll help. Someone needs to stand up to that woman." Over the next few days, I contacted 3 other families, the single mother, the veteran, and a couple who'd been cited for the color of their curtains visible from the street. Visible from the street. Every single one of them had similar stories. Every single one of them had given in to Carol's demands because they didn't think they could fight back. We met at my house on a Saturday afternoon. 6 families, all with stories of harassment and abuse of power. Bill Patterson joined us too, as a witness and someone who'd seen Carol's behavior firsthand at board meetings. David attended the meeting and took detailed notes. By the end of it, we had a stack of violation notices, emails, and documented incidents going back almost 2 years. "This is more than enough," David said. "We're not just fighting your case anymore. We're building a case against Carol and the way she's been running this HOA." As everyone was leaving, the veteran, whose name was Tom, pulled me aside. "Thank you for doing this. I'm ashamed I didn't fight back when it was happening to me, but I'm glad to help now." "We're all helping each other," I told him. That night I went down to my lake and cast a line into the water as the sun was setting. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. I wasn't just fighting for my right to fish anymore. I was fighting for something bigger. For fairness. For accountability. For every person who'd been pushed around by someone with a little bit of power and too much ego. The battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But now I had allies, evidence, and a plan. Carol Pritchard had picked the wrong person to mess with. David moved fast once we had all the documentation from the other homeowners. Within 3 days, he'd filed a formal lawsuit against the HOA for harassment, abusive process, and attempting to deprive me of my property rights. He also filed a separate complaint with the county about Carol's conflict of interest regarding her son-in-law's development company. The lawsuit was a big step, and honestly, it scared me a little. I'd never sued anyone in my life. But David assured me we had a strong case, and more importantly, it was the right thing to do. "This isn't just about you anymore," he reminded me. "This is about setting a precedent. HOAs need accountability." The reaction was immediate. The day after the lawsuit was filed, I got a call from the HOA's board secretary, a nervous-sounding man named Paul who I'd met once at a neighborhood gathering. "Look, I just want you to know that not everyone on the board agrees with how Carol's been handling things," he said quietly, like he was afraid someone might overhear. "Some of us have been uncomfortable for a while, but she's very persuasive." "Persuasive or intimidating?" I asked. There was a pause. "Maybe a little of both." Paul explained that Carol had dominated the board since being elected. She'd pushed through decisions without proper discussion, dismissed concerns from other board members, and made it clear that anyone who disagreed with her would face consequences. The other board members had mostly gone along with her because it was easier than fighting. "But this lawsuit," Paul continued, "it's got people talking. Some of the board members are worried. Our insurance company is already asking questions." That was exactly what David had predicted. HOA insurance companies don't like lawsuits, especially ones that involve obvious overreach and harassment. They tend to push for quick settlements to avoid bigger problems. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA's insurance company's legal team. They wanted to meet. David and I went together to their downtown office the following Monday. The insurance company's attorney was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s who got straight to the point. She'd reviewed the case, the HOA's documents, my property records, and all the violation notices Carol had sent. "Your client has a very strong case," she said to David, not even pretending otherwise. "The HOA has no legal standing to restrict Mr. She glanced at her notes for my name. "To restrict his use of his private property. The amendments that were passed are legally questionable at best, and the pattern of harassment is well documented." "So what are you proposing?" David asked. "We're recommending that the HOA drop all complaints, rescind all fines, and issue a formal apology. We're also recommending they update their covenants to clarify the limits of HOA authority." It sounded good, but I had a question. What about Carol? What about the other people she's harassed? The attorney shifted in her seat. That's outside the scope of our settlement offer. The board composition is up to the homeowners. David shook his head. Not good enough. My client wants assurance that this pattern of behavior stops. That means addressing the source of the problem. We went back and forth for about an hour. Eventually, the insurance attorney agreed to recommend that the HOA board call for a special election and review Carol's actions as president. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was a start. But before any of that could happen, something else occurred that I never saw coming. Bill Patterson called me on a Wednesday evening, his voice urgent. You need to check your email. Like right now. I pulled up my email on my phone. There was a message from the HOA board with the subject line, Emergency Homeowner Meeting, Mandatory Attendance Requested. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at the community center. The email didn't explain what it was about, but the tone was serious. What's going on? I asked Bill. I'm not entirely sure, but I heard from Paul that some homeowners are circulating a petition about Carol. I think things are about to get interesting. Saturday came and I drove to the community center with a knot in my stomach. I had no idea what to expect. The parking lot was packed, which was unusual. Most HOA meetings only drew 5 or 6 people. Inside, the community room was standing room only. I counted at least 60 people, maybe more. In a neighborhood of 80 homes, that was a massive turnout. David had come with me just in case things got legal. Carol was sitting at the front table with the other 4 board members looking calm and composed. But I noticed her jaw was tight and she kept checking her phone. The board president pro tem, since Carol had a conflict of interest with any discussion about her own conduct, called the meeting to order. His name was George, a retired accountant who'd always seemed like a reasonable guy. Thank you all for coming, George began. We've called this emergency meeting because several homeowners have raised concerns about HOA governance and leadership. We're going to hear from those homeowners and then we'll discuss next steps. The first person to stand was Mrs. Johnson, the elderly woman with the garden gnomes. My heart swelled with pride. She was shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. 2 years ago, Carol Pritchard sent my husband and me 17 violation notices in 1 month about our garden decorations. She threatened to place a lien on our home if we didn't remove them. We were terrified. We're on a fixed income and we couldn't afford legal help, so we took down decorations we'd had for 15 years. Decorations our grandchildren gave us. And I want everyone here to know that there was nothing in the HOA rules that prohibited garden gnomes. Nothing. She made us remove them because she personally didn't like them. There was murmuring throughout the room. Carol's face remained neutral, but I saw her hand grip her pen tighter. Tom, the veteran, stood up next. He told his story about being fined for his pickup truck. Then the single mother, whose name was Angela, talked about being harassed over her children's toys. One by one, people stood and shared their experiences with Carol's leadership. Then someone I didn't know stood up. A middle-aged man in a button-down shirt. My name is Robert Chen. Some of you might remember my father owned the property that was recently sold. He was the son of Mr. Chen, the previous owner of my house. About a year ago, my father was approached by a development company about selling his property. They wanted to fill in the lake and build multiple homes. My father refused. He loved that property and wanted it to go to someone who would appreciate it the same way. Shortly after he refused, he started getting HOA violation notices. Constantly. About everything. It stressed him out so much that it contributed to his decision to sell and move to a retirement community. He died 6 months ago, and I've always wondered if the stress of that harassment affected his health. The room went completely silent. Robert pulled out a folder. I brought documentation. Emails from the development company. Records of the violation notices. And I did some research. The development company is owned by Richard Vance, who is married to Carol Pritchard's daughter. You could have heard a pin drop. Carol stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. I don't have to sit here and listen to these accusations. I've done nothing but try to protect property values and maintain community standards. By harassing homeowners? Someone shouted from the back. By driving people out of their homes? Someone else added. George banged his gavel. Order, please. Everyone will have a chance to speak. But the room had erupted. People were angry. Not just the ones who'd been directly targeted, but others who were hearing these stories for the first time. Several people were demanding Carol's resignation. Others were calling for a full investigation. David stood up and identified himself as my attorney. I'd like to submit for the record that we have documentation of similar patterns with my client's situation. We've also filed formal complaints with the county regarding conflict of interest and abuse of authority. Carol's face had gone pale. She looked around the room, seemingly realizing for the first time that she'd lost control of the situation completely. Paul, the board secretary, stood up. He looked nervous but determined. I move that we hold an immediate vote of no confidence in Carol Pritchard's leadership as HOA president. I second that motion, another board member said. Quickly. George looked at Carol. You have the right to respond to these allegations before we vote. Carol grabbed her purse and her phone. I don't need to respond to anything. This is a witch hunt. You're all going to regret this when your property values tank because you let people do whatever they want. She walked out. Just like that. Stormed out of the community center while 60-plus homeowners watched in stunned silence. The vote happened 5 minutes later. It was unanimous. Carol was removed as HOA president, effective immediately. The meeting continued for another hour. The board voted to rescind all violation notices that had been issued under Carol's leadership that weren't clearly justified. They voted to return any fines that had been paid. They established a new appeals process for homeowner disputes. And they voted to hire an independent management company to review all HOA governance procedures. As people were leaving, dozens of neighbors came up to thank me. Many apologized for not speaking up sooner. Mrs. Johnson hugged me with tears in her eyes. You gave us our voices back, she said. But I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt relieved. Exhausted but relieved. Bill walked out with me to the parking lot. You know she's not going to let this go quietly, he said. Carol's not the type to just accept defeat. He was probably right. But I'd faced her at her worst and I was still standing. Whatever came next, I could handle it. I drove home, walked down to my lake, and for the first time in months went fishing without looking over my shoulder. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and orange. A heron landed at the far edge of the lake, our usual spot. Everything wasn't perfect yet. There were still legal details to work out, still loose ends to tie up. But the worst was over. I'd fought for my right to fish in my own lake and I'd won. More importantly, I'd helped other people find their voices and stand up for themselves. As I reeled in my first cast of the evening, I smiled. Retirement was supposed to be peaceful, and it had been anything but. Yet somehow I wouldn't change a thing. Bill was right about Carol not letting things go quietly. 2 days after the emergency meeting, I received a letter from her personal attorney threatening to sue me for defamation. According to the letter, I'd coordinated a campaign to destroy her reputation and force her out of her position. David almost laughed when I showed it to him. This is a desperate move. Everything discussed at that meeting was either documented fact or personal testimony from affected homeowners. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. She has no case. He sent back a response that basically said bring it on, and we never heard from her attorney again. What happened next, though, was better than I could have imagined. The new interim HOA board, led by George, moved quickly to clean up the mess Carol had left behind. Within 2 weeks, they'd hired a property management company to handle day-to-day operations and ensure everything was done by the book. The management company reviewed every violation notice issued during Carol's tenure. Out of hundreds of notices, they found that less than 20% were actually legitimate violations of clear HOA rules. The rest were either personal preferences, misinterpretations of vague rules, or completely made up. They sent out letters to every homeowner who'd been affected, formally apologizing and refunding any fines that had been paid. Mrs. Johnson got her $300 back. Tom got his $500. Angela, the single mother, got back almost $1,000 she'd paid over 18 months of harassment. The board also updated the community covenants to explicitly state that HOA authority only extended to common areas and clearly visible property elements that affected the neighborhood's appearance. Private use of private property was off limits unless it created genuine nuisances like noise, smell, or safety hazards. My lawsuit was settled out of court within a month. The HOA formally apologized in writing, admitted they'd had no authority to regulate my lake, rescinded every violation notice and fine, and agreed to pay my legal fees. It cost them about $15,000 total, all covered by their insurance, but the money wasn't why I'd fought. It was about the principle, about not letting someone abuse their power just because they could. The real question everyone was asking was what would happen to Carol. For a few weeks, she stayed in her house, barely leaving except for necessities. I saw her once from a distance at the grocery store. She turned and walked the other way when she spotted me. Then about 6 weeks after the emergency meeting, I noticed a for sale sign go up in front of her house. Bill confirmed what we'd all suspected. She's moving. Heard she and her husband are relocating to a different state where his company has an office. Fresh start, I guess. I felt a mixture of emotions about that. Part of me was glad she'd be gone and couldn't cause any more problems. But another part of me felt a twinge of something like pity. She'd destroyed her own reputation, damaged her relationships with everyone in the neighborhood, and probably caused her family a lot of embarrassment. All because she couldn't let go of control and had let her son-in-law's business interests cloud her judgment. Carol's house sold quickly. A young couple with a baby moved in about 2 months later. They were friendly, normal people who were just happy to have a nice home in a quiet neighborhood. They had no idea about the drama that had happened before they arrived, and I saw no reason to tell them. Life in Pine Valley slowly returned to normal, but it was a better normal. People were more engaged with the HOA. Board meetings that used to draw 5 or 6 people now regularly had 20 or 30 attendees. Homeowners actually read the meeting minutes and asked questions. There was accountability now, and everyone seemed determined to make sure what happened with Carol never happened again. George and the other board members did something else that surprised me. They organized a community barbecue at the park, the first social event Pine Valley had held in years. They wanted to rebuild the sense of community that had been damaged by all the conflict. I almost didn't go. I'm not really a big social gathering kind of person. But Bill convinced me it would be good to show my face, to let people know there were no hard feelings. The barbecue was actually nice. There were probably 50 people there, kids running around playing, adults chatting and eating. Several people came up to thank me again for standing up to Carol. Some apologized for not supporting me sooner or for believing Carol's version of events. One conversation stuck with me. A man in his 30s named Derek, who lived 3 streets over, approached me while I was getting a burger. "I need to apologize to you," he said. "I was one of the people who thought you were just being difficult about following HOA rules. Carol sent around those emails making you sound like you thought you were above the rules. I'm ashamed to say I believed her without checking the facts. I even avoided making eye contact with you a few times when I saw you." "I'm really sorry," I shook his hand. No hard feelings. She was convincing. That's how people like her operate. Still, I should have thought for myself. Lesson learned. Toward the end of the barbecue, Mrs. Johnson came over with her husband. They were holding hands and smiling. "We wanted you to see something," she said, pulling out her phone. She showed me a photo of their front yard, now decorated with garden gnomes again, but not just the old ones. Their grandchildren had bought them new ones too. There must have been 20 colorful gnomes scattered throughout their garden. "We got our gnomes back," Mr. Johnson said, grinning, "and this time nobody's taking them away." I felt a lump in my throat. They looked great. As fall turned into winter, I settled into the peaceful retirement I'd originally imagined. I fished every morning that the weather allowed. The lake partially froze in January, but by February, it had thawed enough for me to get back out there. Something unexpected happened that spring. I was fishing one Saturday morning when I heard voices. I turned and saw Bill Patterson walking across my lawn with his grandson, a boy about 8 years old. Bill was carrying 2 fishing rods. "Hope you don't mind," Bill called out. "My grandson's visiting for the weekend and I told him about your lake. Thought maybe we could join you?" I smiled. "Come on down. Plenty of room." We spent the morning fishing together. Bill hadn't fished in decades, but it came back to him quickly. His grandson was thrilled when he caught his first fish, a small bluegill that we threw back. Watching that kid's face light up reminded me why I loved fishing in the first place. It wasn't about the fish. It was about the peace, the connection with nature, and sharing those moments with people. Word spread. The next weekend, Tom showed up with his daughter and asked if they could fish. Then Angela brought her 2 kids. Before I knew it, I had a regular Saturday morning fishing group. It was all informal, just neighbors stopping by, and I loved it. By summer, I'd started what we jokingly called the Pine Valley Fishing Club. though it wasn't really a club. Just a bunch of neighbors who'd show up on Saturday mornings to fish, chat, and enjoy the lake. Some mornings we'd have 3 people. Other mornings we'd have 10. I taught several kids how to cast, how to be patient, how to respect nature. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The lake that Carol tried to shut down, the activity she'd called a liability and tried to ban, had become the thing that brought the neighborhood together. One Saturday in July, almost exactly a year after Carol had first confronted me, I was standing at the lake with about a dozen neighbors. Kids were laughing, adults were swapping fishing stories, and someone had brought donuts. George, who'd become a regular, pulled me aside. "You know, when you first moved here and all this started, I was worried it would tear the neighborhood apart," he said. "But looking around now, I think it actually made us stronger. We learned to stand up for each other. We learned to question authority when something doesn't feel right. And we learned that community isn't about following rules blindly. It's about people taking care of each other." He was right. What Carol meant for bad had somehow turned into something good. My daughter Kelly visited that summer with my grandkids. We spent a morning fishing together, and she watched as neighbors stopped by to say hello, as kids ran around the lake catching tadpoles, as the community I'd accidentally helped rebuild went about its normal, happy life. "You found your peace, Dad?" she said, putting her arm around me. "It took a fight to get here, but you found it. I had. The house by the lake was everything I'd wanted when I retired, but it had become more than that. It had become a place where people felt welcome, where kids learned to fish, where neighbors became friends, where someone had tried to use power to divide and instead, we'd used principle to unite." I still think about Carol sometimes. I wonder if she ever reflects on what happened, if she learned anything from it. I hope she did. I hope she found peace wherever she ended up. As for me, I wake up most mornings, make my coffee, grab my tackle box, and head down to my lake. Sometimes I'm alone. Sometimes I have company. Either way is fine. I'm fishing in my own lake on my own property, just like I always had the right to do, and nobody's calling the authorities on me anymore. Life is good. Life is peaceful. And every time I cast my line into that water, I'm reminded that standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, is always worth it. The lake is quiet this morning. The heron's here, standing in his usual spot. The sun's coming up over the trees, painting everything gold. I've got my coffee, my rod, and all the time in the world. This is exactly what retirement should be.